Hey friends, I'm Cal Walters, and I'm here to tell you that leadership matters. Leadership is a choice. It's available to all who are willing to learn about it, to pursue it, and to implement it in all of its messiness. I hope you enjoy this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. Let's go make it count. All right, Zebrina, Jason, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you both on.
So great to be here, Cal.
Hey, thanks for having us, Cal. Really appreciate it.
You both are such a wonderful blend of experience and insights. And I love the book you guys have put together, The Leader's Choice. I'm very thankful to an intentional leader team member, Jaron Alexander, who introduced me to you all and the book. And so we're going to dive into a lot of that today. It's such a nice blend of military experience and private sector experience. And so one curiosity I have that I don't really know the answer to is, Sabrina, tell us, how did you and Jason get connected in the first place?
Yeah, so how did I meet Jason? It's not really a wild story, but a cool story. So, I've been working with the defense sector as a civilian for nearly 2 decades, and mostly in the educational space. And there was a year where I just got really inspired because I really have gotten to genuinely value the military and veterans and what they have to offer to society. So I was trying to create a program for transitioning veterans. And through my research and connection with different networks, I was introduced to Jason, and he was at the time the executive director for Stop Soldier Suicide. And we got to work on a project together. So we had a lot of great conversations, deep conversations, and I, was probing a lot of asking him more about what the veteran experience is like. And I found that, a lot of the conversations tended to gravitate towards more negative connotations or stereotypes. And I kept on asking why. And really, at the bottom line, we figured out that a lot of the reasons these things were happening is because of ignorance in some way, or just unawareness of what veteran leadership is. So as we were exploring and having these conversations, we got really excited about it to try to explore, how do we flip this conversation? How do we bring the positive light to this? And so that's kind of how we started working together.
And Jason, where were you at that point when you guys met?
So at the time, I was working as the executive director of a nonprofit called Stop Soldier Suicide. And Sabrina actually sponsored an event for us within the Chapel Hill area. And that's how I got to meet Sabrina originally. And we just started having conversations from there about what's happening in the transition space with military leaders, veterans, and their families as they enter back into society.
Now, Jason, one of the things that you point out in the book that I thought was really interesting. So you both talk about these kind of confluence of factors that are happening right now in society. One of which is this disappearance of the military veteran in modern society. And there's some kind of staggering statistics in there that struck me. Honestly, I hadn't really thought too much about it. And you guys already mentioned there's a lot of negative discussions about veterans, about suicide, PTSD, all of these things. But Jason, tell us a little bit more about this disappearance of the military veteran in modern society and kind of the impact of that.
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, because I think that this is really the reason why we decided to write the book, was because we recognized that the lessons that typically happen when military leaders become veteran leaders in society and the things that they bring to improve society as a whole, those things are getting lost. When you go back to the time period of, and I know I'm going way back here, but you have to go way back into like the 80s and even into the 70s, which is, believe it or not, I was alive. I don't know if you were alive at that point, Cal, but
maybe
back
in the
then,
80s. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So, but back then, when you look at the demographics of the workforce, so much of the workforce had veteran experience. I think in the 80s, it was about 60% of all CEOs had veteran experience. It was approximately 1 in every 4 people in the workforce had veteran experience. They had served in the military. They were a spouse of somebody in the military. And even our elected officials back in the 70s, the numbers were close to about between 70 and 80%, depending on which house of Congress. Fast forward to, and you take a look at really the last decade, you've only got about 12% of CEOs that were veterans. At the end of the World War II and the Korean War, about 50% of new businesses were created by veterans. And now only about 5% of veterans are creating businesses, and only less than 20% of our elected officials are veterans. And so we notice that the veterans are shrinking. Veterans represent only about 6% of the workforce if you take a look at the Department of Labor stats. And what we were trying to explore is, okay, so what's the impact to society? So to really understand that, you've really got to step all the way back and understand the value that not the warrior, but the veteran brings to society. So we took a look at a lot of the philosophy and some of the archetypal anthropology about what happens in basic tribal societies and what do veterans bring. And what we've learned through the study of Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey and doing a lot of the research on the basic tribal culture is that these military leaders, when they come back into society, they ascend into more prominent positions to help guide the social order for the benefit. They become the master of that warrior lifestyle as well as the leadership in the civilian lifestyle. And what Zebrina and I came to conclude is when you look at some of the challenges that are happening across the workforce today, our thought is that perhaps this is not incidental, this is consequential. And because you are losing some of those experiential lessons that the military grooms throughout the career experience and then brings into society to help society as a whole flourish. So those are some of the things that the disappearing veteran segment, we believe, has this adverse impact on society as a whole. So veterans end up being misunderstood. Because people don't recognize or they're not familiar with their leadership approach, not from a military construct. I'm just talking about from a human to human construct that's getting lost. And so veterans are taking jobs, and they're decent jobs, but what we're not doing is we're not taking advantage of the full potential of what they can do for the organizations, for our communities and society as a whole.
Yeah. So it seems like in the past, the veteran impact, those tools and experiences that they had would just kind of naturally make their way into the other sectors of society. But it seems like now what you're saying is there's this kind of shrinking of that population. So there's not this natural flow. And so it seems to me some of what you guys are doing in this book is trying to more deliberately and intentionally, okay, let's pull out what are those qualities of these warriors that we can now teach and intentionally push into society to kind of get what previously happened naturally. Because you think about World War II, for example, you had so many, it was the entire society was devoted to that and felt that impact. And now that's just not happening. And then it's interesting too. So Zebrina, you guys also talk about just the overall, I guess, status of leadership and employee engagement in society. So you've got this disappearance of veterans, and then you also have just a not so great picture of employee engagement and leadership in society. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like and your experience with that.
It is a compoundment of issues. Those numbers that we were looking at, some examples are, if we're only 45% of employees have trust in their senior management. 18% of people believe business leaders tell them the truth. And also about 70% of the employee population is actively looking for a job. So you have to understand that while people are working, they're also looking for another job, it's crazy. Those are staggering numbers. And what we found, Jason and I have found, is just those are symptoms of a number of problems, but all those problems can be found at the root cause, which is a general lack of leadership. And with the lack of leadership, it also leads to poor and ineffective engagement. And it's really no fault to our societies. It's not their fault, right? Because if you really look at history, again, our higher education institution has very similar models to what the labor workforce looks like. You know, in the commercial sector, you have to work the next job to prove yourself in order to get that promotion or even be considered for that promotion. So there's a lot there that that kind of instigates and causes those problems.
And you also talk about this VUCA, so the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that also exists.
Yeah, right. All very positive terms, right? Very exciting terms to look forward to. Very foreboding, but it's really the current state that we're living in fact, and then probably the new normal. And this term was actually created and more brought to the attention of society through the Army War College, right?
Oh,
so
okay.
the military
That's where that comes
actually,
from.
right. So it's derived from some research in the civilian sector, but really what brought it to light, it was at the Army War College during the late 80s to describe the post-Cold War era. And it's now been adopted by the civilian sector, the commercial sector. And what's interesting about VUCA is that if an organization actually sits down and looks at VUCA and all the different elements of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, these are actually lenses that an organization can look at to create a plan and look at the current state of things and the future state of things. And it gives organizations boundaries of how to plan and look ahead. So VUCA, while very negative, is actually a great stage for helping managers and leaders.
Well, that's immediately what I think about. To me, VUCA is what makes leadership so tough. Not to mention the fact that you are dealing with human beings who also are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? Like, so human beings themselves are that, but also society itself is that. And so leadership is hard. And I mean, I think that there's probably, you look at these statistics, 45% of employees don't trust their senior management. And it's easy to just view that in a vacuum and think, oh, well, these are just a bunch of really bad senior managers. But also, like, we have to acknowledge, like, leadership itself is hard. Those senior managers are busy. They're trying to get a job done. They've got families to go home to. So it's not just lack of character, I would imagine. A lot of it is just like leaders don't always have the tools to go lead well in these tough environment. So Jason, what really led you and Zebrina to write the book, The Leader's Choice?
Well, as we were looking at how to do this, we when you look at all the things that the military does, and because so much of the dialogue, and I've been working in and around this transition space for the past since I retired in 2015. And some of the common things that I hear is about how military leadership doesn't apply, how military leaders have to conform to how the civilian way, the corporate world does things. The language is different. And just the entire notion, and I always get triggered by this, the idea that leadership is a soft skill. I don't understand that. And that's why the way we start off the book is we talk about the leadership moment, because that moment of leadership is where other people are really, really counting on you. And you, as the person they're looking towards, you don't have somebody to look to, but you've got to be able to provide that purpose, direction, and motivation in a moment of crisis, even when you're not sure of the outcome. It is a very, very uncomfortable place to be in. And in order to be successful in those positions, it's a very learned skill that the military uses to develop these qualities in men and women so that whenever they show up in any situation, they are very comfortable in these remarkably uncomfortable situations. They are decisive in these kinds of situations. And so understanding that and being able to communicate that, hey, look, this military stuff works in the civilian world. It doesn't require a drill instructor in uniforms and salutes and all the traditions, and which is what I think, because so few people nowadays are connected to the military experience, it's hard for them to grasp the applicability of this to the civilian life. So what we did was we started to do some research about let's break down what the military does in a different language. Like, let's look at it through the realm of psychology and organizational behavior. And so that's what we did. And we started to break down the doctrine and compare it to different things like emotional intelligence and the hierarchy of needs and self-determination theory, transformational leadership. And what we found is that the similarities between how the military develops and grooms leaders and the best practices from the science and organizational behavior were strikingly similar. So the whole reason for writing the book was, let's translate that for people so that they could apply this in the things that they're doing in their jobs, in their lives. So it doesn't feel so foreign, because the science has been validated. So if you understand that the science is really the bridge to apply this stuff, you can do all these things in your organization. And why is the military good at it? And you alluded to this, like, and Zebrina talked about the end of the Cold War. Like when we had a 1 million person standing army, active army, at the end of the 1980s. Again, I'm going way back there again. So if you smell mold and it feels musty, I apologize for that. But back when it was like that, and everything that we had in our military arsenal was designed, our training, our equipment, to defeat the Soviet Union, all of it. And when the Soviet Union went away, like, there was this downward pressure on everything that was defense. But we still had a job to protect the country, but now we didn't have clarity on what that threat was going to be. So the military, whether it was consequential or incidental, they said, well, we've got to focus on the people. We've got to make the people better, and they become the competitive asset to win regardless of the challenge. So we're going to make that investment, and that's going to be the focus. So it used to be externally focused. Hey, we got to defeat this adversary. And then it became, let's build up the capability so that we don't have to just accomplish that mission, but we can accomplish any mission. And I think what you're seeing across society, particularly in the last 2 decades, is that is a quality that communities, businesses, and organizations are so desperately in need of.
So Jason, for the listener out there, maybe they're in the military or they were in the military and they happen to come across a bad military leader, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, so it sounds like to me what you're advocating for is take that bad military leader that they experienced, and now we need to teach that to the private sector or something like that. So what would you say to that person in terms of, I mean, is the military as a whole just generally better at leadership, or are there just certain qualities and best practices that you guys are trying to pull out to push into other sectors of society?
I don't think that military leaders are better than civilian leaders per se. I just believe that they have a different developmental experience. And because of that, they're just better prepared for the kinds of challenges that the modern world is thrust upon us, whether it's COVID, whether it's economic uncertainty, whether it's national security related, all these challenges, a housing crisis, or the social unrest that you see across our nation, the political polarization. Like, the military has developed people from a very young age to be able to step into these kinds of situations and find ways to be successful. It's different from how the non-military world operates, where like, hey, Cal, I'm going to give you the job. You may not be trained in it. You may not have any qualifications in it, but you're going to be the personnel officer for this unit, or you're going to be the supply officer for this unit, even though you don't know what you're doing. Your job is to kind of figure it out, get to know the people who are the experts, connect with them, have them teach you, develop that learning agility so that you can, and build those bonds of trust, so that as the experts are giving you advice, you can understand that, yes, this is good advice and I can take it, but you own the responsibility of it. Like, you've had that your entire military journey, so that when you leave, you've had all these kinds of qualities and traits and strengths really harnessed within you. Whereas the civilian world is more along the lines of, the best doctors end up becoming the heads of and the chiefs of medicine. The best engineers become the directors of engineering. The best salespeople end up becoming, regional sales managers. And there's nothing wrong with rewarding great performance, but the experience of development is just different. Because in the military, I don't care that you become the best personnel officer or supply officer in the Army. That doesn't matter. I want you to be remarkably comfortable, able to build diverse relationships across a wide variety of people, optimize their potential to solve whatever problem I'm going to throw at you, as opposed to, you're really good at sales and now you can tell other people how to be good at sales. So it's just a different experience. There are great leaders in the military and in the civilian world, just as there are poor leaders in the military and the civilian world. What Sabrina and I are trying to distinguish is that the journey is different. So understanding the value that experience can provide in a non-military organization is different.
So how do you, go ahead, Sabrina. Yeah, I want to hear your perspective.
Add on. Well, and what's interesting about promoting in the civilian sector is promoting the best chief engineer to become a manager, is that more often than not, they don't like that job because they went into the job wanting to do engineering. Now they have to manage people. So a lot of companies are facing this management tier of individuals who are really good at their job, but they don't have the skills to actually lead.
Yeah.
And it's important for companies to be able to have that conversation with their employees of like, do you really want this? And if you do, how can we support you to get those leadership skills? And, I would push back a tad on Jason about, the level of expertise in both the civilian sector and the military. I do think if you look at it from, the framework of how the journey is, I do think corporations build and foster the promotion of managers. They build great managers, but the military does a phenomenal job of building great leaders. So, it's just, that's just the way it is in the environment that they're brought up in.
Well, tell me about the distinction there between manager and leader in your view.
Well, many will argue that there isn't a difference. But, all great leaders can be great managers. All great managers cannot be great leaders. So there is a difference between two. And the biggest distinction is a leader is one who is able to inspire and empower their people. And it takes a lot of trust and a lot of leadership skill sets to be able to do that. And not all managers can do that.
Jason, you mentioned earlier kind of having a frustration with that idea that leadership is a soft skill. Yes. Tell me more about that.
There's a lot of skills that military leaders have that I think are very much marginalized because there's not a certificate that you get for these kinds of things. I think leadership is one of them. It's become almost cliche and meaningless to talk about leadership. And I can study leadership and I can do all these things. But like I said, the thing that makes the military leaders unique, and I mean, if you look at what we've been doing in this counterinsurgency, we're asking young men and women who know nothing about these cultures to go into some very dangerous areas, in many cases under-resourced, unfamiliar areas, and we're asking them to do a lot of very difficult things. Mm. And, leadership is, the only way you can really brand somebody as a leader, it has to come from a follower. And so many people say, well, I'm a leader. Well, I don't think you can self-identify for that. Like, the leadership comes from the people who are willing to follow you. If you look over your shoulder and there's nobody behind you, you're not leading a damn thing. So I think that's a part of it. So we, just like Zebrina said, some people brand management, or we do it with business metrics. And I don't think that, the first thing that happens in a crisis is that all the equations we had for the business metrics, they all get thrown into a blender. The thing that remains is the people. And that's to be able, when you're not comfortable, to provide that positive motivation for them in that situation so that the organization can eventually get through that crisis. That stuff is really hard. And what leaders learn, leaders have become very good at this construct called, there's two of them, defensive pessimism, and the other one is collective efficacy, right? And if you look up what those terms mean, defensive pessimism means that I'm going to look forward, I'm going to anticipate and visualize how things are going to unfold. I'm going to identify the risk, I'm going to anticipate the consequences, and then I'm going to shape how things unfold in a way that creates an advantage. And that's so I can respond and maintain initiative through a crisis, as opposed to reacting to how things are happening to me. That's one of the things that military leaders do that you don't see in a job description as people are applying for jobs. The other thing is this idea of collective efficacy, and this gets after the gap to growth leadership. Collective efficacy means is that I'm going to take, and if you look at our elite military units, this is how they do it. I'm going to take best qualities of everybody on the team, and I'm going to raise them. I'm going to inspire them to different levels of potential and outcomes that perhaps they didn't even think was possible. And when you look at the high-performing teams in the military, that's how they do it. So it's not about, I'm going to give you more money. Yeah, there's a baseline, and that's why we call it gap to growth. I've got to address the basic needs. I've got to address the psychological needs in order to get towards this self-actualization. And every person is different, which is why this leadership is not soft. It's very hard, because I may have to talk to you, Cal, about something that you're dealing with on a personal level, because you've got some kind of a financial problem, somebody in the family passed away, and that's your reality. Then I'm talking to Zebrina, and her whole thing is about feeling like she's a part of the team. So I've got to have the ability to coach, teach, and mentor you to address your needs and then get you to that level of self-actualization, which is different than how I engage Zebrina. So it's a much more dynamic experience. And so I don't ever qualify that as something that is soft. And these are the things that military leaders are expected to do. Why? Because I don't get to pick and choose my team. It's given to me. And I've got constraints with that team, resources. I don't have the right people that I have to do the kinds of jobs I'm being asked to do, but I got to figure it out. So I've got to tap into that potential and take it to that next level.
Yeah, Jason, can you elaborate on what self-actualization is?
Yeah, so self-actualization is when we're getting after that height of human potential, right? It's not how am I just doing my job? It's how I'm leveraging all of my strengths. And this is where the book, we're combining the science with how this is done. The most productive, the most efficacious organizations are those that find new ways to optimize the qualities, the strengths that people are bringing to an organization in order to achieve higher levels of potential. It improves their well-being. it improves their resilience, and it achieves this quality called flourishing, where you are actually your best self. And the military needs its people to operate at that level. Do they all operate at that level? No, of course they don't, because this is hard stuff to do. Like, every military leader is not perfect. And I would never suggest that they are. But what we are talking about is, okay, so what's the process that's involved there? And how can I learn about this process? I'll give you an example. When I was a battalion commander, we were ranked dead last in the military in terms of resources, because the unit just came back from Afghanistan. Defense budgets were contracting. We were going to be, a refit and rebuild unit the whole time that I was in command. It was not a priority for us to be ready to deploy. Fast forward a year into the job, and I got a call around the Thanksgiving timeframe. And the call hey, and it came from Department of the Army. They called the brigade called me. We went up there, we had this meeting, and it was, hey, I want to know what you guys can do. We need you to potentially deploy to not one, not two, not three locations, but 4 different locations. And we need you to do it within the next month or so. Now, keep in mind, I'm reporting the lowest readiness on my USR. I just lost all of my experienced people because I took command right when the unit came back from Afghanistan. And now I've got all these new people. I have no resources to train people on how to fly. I've lost all my leadership trainers that were going to do that for people. And now we're potentially going to be sending people downrange and in harm's way. And the answer to that problem was, we started solving that very early on. And we focused on, hey, how do we make these people better? So we did a lot of creative things. We sent medics to go get EMS qualified. They were working in emergency rooms, and they were doing things outside the norm. We actually talked to the Army and brought aircraft that were sitting in storage to our units so that we could train people, even though we didn't have all the aircraft we owned were in reset. And we leveraged the experience of everybody on that team to come up with solutions. We completely restructured our companies so that we can build like a medevac capability, because that's one of the things that we needed from some of the other capabilities that we had in the battalion based on previous qualifications. And so we completely restructured the organization. We took a look at inventoried all the things that we were expected to do. And if you were going to do it when you arrived in country, we didn't have to do it when we were here preparing people to go. Because we empowered junior leaders to lead brigade level exercises. So captains were in charge of very senior exercises. By the time that we got to this level, now they were going to be asked to be in charge of units that were forward deployed. They were comfortable to do it because we had invested that early on in the process. So bottom line is this: within a week, we briefed this plan, and it wasn't my plan. It was all the people on the team came up with this plan, because I wouldn't have figured this out on my own. But they figured it out. Why? Because they're the experts at doing this stuff. And they took ownership of it, and they achieved something that, honestly, when we were originally asked to do this, I didn't think we were going to be able to do any of it. But they did. And we supported all these deployments. We grew a 4-platoon medevac unit into 5 platoons, and then even grew a 6th platoon on top of that. Why? Because they were creative in how they were figuring out how to do this. This was unprecedented. So we needed people to operate at that much higher level of confidence, of competence, and commitment in order to get after this mission. And they did it. I mean, it was the hardest, easiest job I've ever done in my career, because I didn't do the work. They did it. They made that happen. I just happened to be the guy who was sitting in the chair at the time. And that is the potential that Zebrina and I, we believe we can bring to communities, to businesses, so that when the next COVID hits, when the next market collapse hits, the next big challenge faces our society, units aren't just worried about languishing or surviving, they're thriving. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's such a great example. I think you're probably downplaying the role that you had as the leader. And I think because how much leadership experience had you had at that point?
It was 20 years. I mean,
yeah. So you've been in for
was
20 years. And you were leading a battalion is about how many folks?
600.
600 people. But you experienced success. And I think it seems to me what we're talking about is the ability to put someone in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous situation and to be able to lead. And it just because you're a really great engineer doesn't necessarily mean that you have developed the discipline and the toolkit to lead. I mean, we could put you in front. I mean, my wife, for example, has been in sales for a while, and she's seen that experience of like, just because you're the biggest, you're the best performing salesperson doesn't necessarily mean that you have that skill set to then go and lead a team of salespeople. One of my friends, Ryan Hall, who has a great podcast, The Learning Leader Show, he wrote a book, Welcome to Management. It's all about that. Like his experience as being a really great individual contributor, but then getting promoted to being a leader and being like, oh man, I have no idea what to do. But Jason, I'll say, and I'm not, from my experience, it that has probably become one of my best traits, I would say, is the ability to get put in a position and just kind of figure it out. And I kind of feel like West Point and then just these different experiences over time has given me that ability. And I'm not an expert really in much or in anything probably. But I've kind of developed that ability to do that. I was talking to a friend the other day because we were talking about assignments, and I'm in the military still, and we'll get 2 to 3 year assignments. And often you're getting put in a position that you really don't know what you're doing. Right now, I'm leading a team of prosecutors. I'd never done that before. You kind of figure it out. And so my friend and I were talking about it, and he was like, like, don't you get kind of nervous about going into a job that you don't really know? And I think over time there's enough data points where you realize you'll figure it out.
And that gets after, and I hate to cut you in there, but it brings up this really good point. It really emphasizes the need for your self-awareness. Like you have to know your strengths. Mm-hmm. You have to know your values. You have to know those intrinsic resources that you have so that when you step into that situation, you can have the confidence. Mm-hmm. And like the thing I would ask people that are listening is that if I was to ask you, what were your values? What was your purpose? What were your character strengths and what are your talent strengths? Because character strengths and talent strengths in the field of psychology are two different things. Could you answer that question? And the thing that you get throughout your military career is every evaluation cycle, these things are hammered on you. The things that you're doing well, the things that you're not doing well. So you're building this repertoire of all these qualities that I have that I can bring into any situation and learn how to succeed. And then the way you were talking about, hey, I work with these prosecutors. The second thing that I would ask people is that I understand the need to evaluate performance and the things that you've done well, but how are you betting on potential? Because you don't know what that next big challenge is going to be. So what are the things that you're doing in your organization, or what could you do in order to start really building out that potential? Potential is measured in a baseline level of competencies, right? Of things that you could do well, things about yourself. It's confidence, and confidence is built by being in those situations, having that coaching, teaching, and mentoring, and the ability to develop yourself on both a personal and professional level. And it comes from commitment, understanding that, hey, there's a big, meaningful thing that I can achieve here. And it means something to me. My values align to this organization. This speaks to my deeper purpose and the things that I want to achieve and be at my best at. And if you can do that, now you're talking about getting after potential. So when that next challenge hits you, you're not backing away from it. You're doing what your military units do, Cal, which is I'm volunteering. I want to go first. I want to be out there because I believe, man, we can do this. That's the difference of the mindset. And what Sabrina and I are trying to do is bring that mindset back to the rest of America and provide that so that when these challenges happen, our organizations, our communities, our people, our schools, everybody's just standing up and really leaning into it and doing it together.
Jason, I love your enthusiasm. It's so gets me every time.
Tell me, Jason, in the book, you guys talk about gravity payments, Dan Price, and it's in the context of this identity of a leader, and that every leader, how important it is to develop your own identity, which, there are these kind of core competence or components, core components to having the right leader identity. But I wonder if you could share that gravity payment story, because I think it's a really great example of a leader having a solid identity.
Zebrina, you want to talk about that? Because Zebrina is the one who did that part of the book. She did the research on that one. So
Zebrina, tell us about that.
Yeah, so Dan Price, who's the CEO of Gravity Payments, and they issue loans out to small businesses. And during the pandemic, a lot of companies were laying off people, really desperate to do things to impact the bottom line. And what Dan did during that time period, he took a pay cut, basically took a pay cut, and also asked his people, well, what can we do to save the company? I don't want to lay anyone off. What can we do? And what ultimately happened, because he had invested in his people, they actually ended up taking pay cuts as well. And some from like 25%, some were 50%. But they knew in the long run, it would help the company. And so this was something that really stood out to me and Jason when we were doing research of what a true leader is. You've heard of Simon Sinek and leaders eat last. True leaders are the ones that will put their people first. And that was just a phenomenal example of what he's done, and has been a great example for a lot of other companies as well.
And what's interesting about what he did as well is that he set a minimum baseline salary for his people. And he said, hey, I'm going to pay them this much. So rather than raking in, his own equity and business profits, he paid it forward early on and said, no, my people are worth this. And he set a minimum salary point, which was higher than what the industry standard was, because he wanted to take care of his people. Then when, the proverbial hit the fan, and it looked like, hey, the business is going to suffer here, the people were committed because he made that sacrifice. And when you look at like Simon Sinek's book, and he's talking about leaders eat last, that's what he's talking about. And that, hey, I'm here, and I'm here to make sure that your basic needs are met. And if you don't have it, I'm going to give it. I'm going to make that sacrifice. And that's how you build the trust. That it's not about what you say. It's about what you do. The other thing that I think is very telling is military leaders standing in front of the formation. Something happens bad here, I own it. I'm going to take the responsibility for it. I'm here to protect you. Ask every military leader, how do you define success? And they're not going to say mission accomplishment. And they're not going to say for the glory of the United States. They're going to say, did I bring all my people home? Or did I do everything I could to make sure that everybody could come home safely? That is just forged into our psyche as military leaders, so that when we leave, our focus is, what's the culture like? What's this organization doing? How do we take care of these people? So that when we have to do some tough things, and we collectively have to make sacrifices, I've built that trust. I've made that investment so that the return and the amazing things that this organization can do, I've already paid it forward. I don't have to ask. I don't have to threaten. I don't have to lay people off, because the money's always going to go away. The thing that's there is the people.
Right.
And, the business metrics don't show all that potential. So again, like gets after that question, How are you tapping into potential? Not performance, not business metrics, but what's there beneath the surface? Because when you're in those leadership moments, that's what you have to count on. You have to count on the things that aren't on a piece of paper. People are squirrely. I get that. It's very difficult and everybody's different, but that's what makes this so hard. And if you have the ability to inculcate these qualities early on and make managers effective coaches, effective teachers, and effective mentors, it becomes its own self-sustaining ecosystem. And that's what the military's done. Look, Cal, you're a better leader today than I was. Why? Because the challenges are harder. They're much harder for you than they were for me. So you've got to be better. But I'm just grateful that we had this ecosystem that enabled you to be better so that you can face these challenges. I mean, the stuff that lieutenants and captains had to do when I was a battalion commander, man, I don't know if I'd have made it, but that's what it does, is that you keep raising this bar of excellence generationally as you're cycling through it, because the business stuff is always going to change. But being able to tap into the potential of people is always going to make it better.
It's interesting to me. It makes me think of what you guys talk about in your book related to camaraderie, of building camaraderie in a team. Because I was talking to General McChrystal the other day, and he was talking about in some ways it's harder to lead in the civilian world than it is in the military in some senses, because in the military you have rank. I can tell you, if I outrank you, I can tell you to go do something and you'll go do it, or there's consequences to it. But that doesn't mean you want to do it. Doesn't mean you're inspired to go do it. Doesn't mean that if I took the rank off, you would go do it. It just means that you're, willing to comply, but you're not necessarily committed to me or to the organization. You're just committed to the rank structure. But the example of Dan Price, there's something about what he did, the sacrifice that he made, that seemed to have inspired other folks to be like, you know what, I'll sacrifice too. Like I'm with you because you've sacrificed, you've demonstrated something that has inspired me to want to be better, to want to do more. It's kind of that difference between like compliance and commitment. So Zebrina, tell us, so let's get in real quick. I want to transition to some practical tools for leaders that you guys outline in the book. We're not going to get to all of them because we just don't have the time, and I want folks to go pick up the book. But you talk about this ADAPT model. Give us a quick, just kind of high level overview of the ADAPT model. And then I want to dig into just one or two of them with the limited time we have left before we wrap it up.
Sure. So our ADAPT framework, we've been talking a lot about a gap in leadership, a gap between civilian and military societies. And what we were trying to do is figure out some mechanism to be able to translate what's going on in the military and bring it to the civilian sector. So ADAPT stands for align, develop, apply, process, and transform. And we derived these elements after going through thousands of pages of leadership doctrine, which I'm sure you have perused maybe at some point, and distilled it down to these elements. And then we underscore it with psychology and organizational behavior. And so that's how we frame what we're talking about. It's our model that we use, and it's actually this premise for the second half of the book, and everything is based on that.
So Jason, one of the things that I am always curious about is how do you develop a strong team? Because that's really what leadership's all. I mean, that at its most fundamental level, it's the ability to take individuals and kind of put them together in a team and make the team better than the individuals would be in themselves. And obviously it takes leading each people, as you already mentioned, individually, meeting them where they're at. But the ability to take a group of just random people, different people, and help that team thrive. I mean, if you can do that, then you can lead. And but it's hard. I mean, we see people all the time that take super talented people, put them together on a sports team, for example, and the team doesn't succeed. Yeah. So there's something about being able to build camaraderie, and you guys talk about that in the book. Tell us just some of the key takeaways. If you're gonna, let's say there's a leader out there listening right now who wants to build a stronger team or wants to develop camaraderie in the team, what are some things you would offer him or her to go do today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the way I would frame that is that everybody comes into an organization for a reason. And normally it's extrinsic, right? You're going to pay me to do a job. I'm joining the military because I want college or something like that. And what happens along the way is, and this is the application of the self-determination theory that Sabrina and I talk about in the book, is what you're doing along the way is that one of the key milestones is that you're going to make small gains, successes as a team. And you're going to reinforce the successes, right? Because there's an incentive tied to it, or it's, hey, I'm going to be in the good graces. Like as new military people, it's, hey, I'm going to stay out of trouble, or I'm going to be acknowledged for having done something right. So it's still an external valuation, but along the way, what happens is you start building a shared identity for the team. So one of the things I would ask people is, what are the qualities that the teammates use to describe your team, and see if they're different. Somebody might see the team. Some people might not see it as a team at all. Some people might say integrity. Some people might say productivity. But the thing that the military does very well is they create a shared identity for that team. And then what we do is we reinforce that identity in all the things that we do. It's not just about the workplace. And what we're doing along the way is we're building this mutual sense of dependence and trust based on shared values. If you were to ask your organization, hey, what are the values this organization lives by? See what people say. And again, that's where that identity comes from. And then ask the people towards the end, as you're doing this exercise, is, okay, so what is it that you believe? What is it you're going to leave for this team? In other words, what is your legacy for this team? And then the second thing is what is it you're going to bring to this team? So I'm going to bring this to this team, and this is going to be my legacy. See what people say regarding that. And what I would challenge you with is, are those things aligned to what the organization is doing or wants to do? And, the self-determination theory talks about relationships, mastery, and autonomy. So as you're going through this process, you're developing these qualities where I'm getting better at things, right? So that's my mastery. I'm giving more responsibility. That's my autonomy. And then I develop trusting relationships along the way. And so that at the end, my behavior is inspired. Why? Because I identify with this team and I recognize that the success of the team satisfies my definition of self-actualization and being my best self. And so those are the things that I would offer for people to be able to apply. Just take an inventory of where you are. What brought people to the organization? How do they identify with the organization? What do they see as the legacy that they're going to have and what they're going to give to the organization? See how that aligns to the things they're expected to do.
So, and when you're diagnosing, when you're trying to get feedback, are these individual meetings where you're just asking people, hey, what are some qualities that stand out to you about our team?
My recommendation would be is a one-on-one format, because you want everybody to give their own answer. Because if people, you want them to think about it. And if people don't know and they see that, their buddy John or Sally wrote down, hey, productivity is something, they might just write that down. You want to have a dialogue. I would even recommend, preferably, it would be a verbal communication, because you want to get their opinion about why is it that you believe our identity is defined by this. Like some organizations might say, hey, this place is every person for themselves. Dog eat dog. You got to meet your profit numbers. And that's okay, if that's what you want for that organization. Ask them what are the qualities of the culture. Ask them how the work that they do aligns with what's really meaningful to them, the things that put them in the flow, and see what they say. because the military has a way of getting people into those situations through trial and error, a bunch of different jobs to where you're going to be tested and challenged.
So let's say you do that, you get some feedback. It's not what you want it to be, or it's not where you want to be. Let's say it's, hey, this is a dog eat dog kind of team. Everybody's out for themselves. No one's really committed. Everybody's just waiting for 5 o'clock to roll around so they can get out of here. No one's happy.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm a leader, I get that kind of feedback from more than one person. What's the next best step to start to change that?
The first thing I would recommend is create self-awareness on the team. Yeah. So I would say, okay, this is how this team is. Like, then I would ask.
Is that to everyone? Is that like when you're creating self-awareness, like, hey, let's get everybody together. Hey, this is where we're at. Is that what you're suggesting? Or are we doing individual meetings again?
The self-awareness is an individual activity. And so you can do it any way that you want, but it would be along the lines of okay, so what are your values? And like, what are your strengths? Like, you have to have that self-awareness coming into this. And then, like when you see, and simultaneously, you could be asking the question, like when you see that, hey, the branding here is not where we want it to be. Where do you want it to be? Like, and ask it in a very open-ended way and hear what you say.
Gotcha.
And then if I'm the leader, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the answers that I get with what we're intending for this organization. What is if we talk about, hey, our job here is to improve social education in the world, and nobody said that, now I want to understand where that gap is coming from. Mm-hmm. And then I want to develop some character-based ways of being able to close that gap. But you got to see where you are and see where you want to be. And there might be people in the organization who don't align with that at all, and that's okay. But we want to find out what are the things that are going, and that's why you ask them, hey, what are you going to give to the team? And what is it you want to leave behind? Like most military leaders will say, hey, my legacy is the fact that the people who I led have actually surpassed me in their careers. Mm-hmm. Like, that's an example of, hey, this is what my legacy is. And here's the thing, everything that I'm talking about is focusing on the people, which is what this whole process is forcing you to do, is getting you to know who they are, what drives and motivates them, so that you can align that for the organization. So you got to see where you are, where do you want it to be, and then what is the identity you want to have for this organization? And how does that align with the deeper mission of what it is that we're trying to do? Then let's set some incremental benchmarks of how we're going to do that, celebrate them, right? So we're acknowledging the positives until we get to that point. And along the way, I'm coaching, teaching, and mentoring so that we're trying to get after what's going to help you self-actualize in a way that gets this team to where it wants to be.
Zebrina, I'm curious because I know you've seen a lot of teams. You've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Is there anything else that you would offer to leaders about creating a really high-performing team?
That's a great question. I mean, and Jason has really highlighted a great deal of that. And really, I'd have to foot stomp the connection with the people on the team, really, really getting to know your people and what makes them tick, what motivates them, what excites them, understanding, where their strengths are and really elevating that. Not so much focusing on the weaknesses. A lot of companies will focus on 360s. Here's what you're doing well, but here's really what you're doing wrong. You really need to fix these things that are doing wrong. And that's a bit demoralizing. You're kind of highlighting these attributes that naturally don't come, they don't come natural to these individuals. So being able to play on everyone's strengths and fill in the gaps too. As a leader, you got to figure out, how do you fill in the gaps? So, and when you build that community of a team, anything can happen. And the level of its, again, potential is the key word here, but this is like a well-run engine at that point. and you can actually let it run. And so it's an investment up front, but at the end of the day, it's less work in the long run. So that's what high performance is.
So one of the things our commanding general, I'm at the 82nd Airborne Division right now. And one of the things our commanding general says all the time, he's like, every single day you fight for your culture. You fight for having that cohesive team. One of the things I do every Monday morning with my team is we get together, we talk about the priorities for the week. And I actually spend about 5 minutes. They probably get, so they kind of laugh at me at this point, but I talk about what it means to be an effective team. I just try to spend 5 minutes doing that every Monday morning, because I just know that like, if I don't fight for that, we're not going to have a cohesive team. Like we don't just kind of fall into having a cohesive team. It seems to me that if anything, we're kind of heading towards being dysfunctional, because we're just a bunch of different people all doing different things, so like if we just kind of let it be, it's not going to probably go in the direction we want it to go. So I think this is really awesome stuff. So I want to ask one last question to you, Jason, then I want to get into a quick lightning round. I'm just curious, can you tell us, so one of the things you talk about in the book that I thought was really cool is about just this idea of being a transformational leader. And feel free to take this however you want, whether it's just kind of telling us about the 4 I's of a transformational leader, or even just talking about, an example of a transformational leader in your own life. But I just love for leaders to walk away understanding what this looks like to be a transformational leader.
Yeah, and thanks for that. And transformational leadership is one of these things. There's Bruce Volio and Bernard Bass, I believe, are the 2 guys who first coined it, like in the early 1990s. And what they're doing is they're looking at leadership along a continuum. And on the one end of the continuum is this basically hands off. Hey, you're going to go do whatever it is you're going to do. And then along the continuum, I go through transactional forms of leadership. You do this, you get that. And at the apex is this idea of transformational leadership. And transformational leadership is really all about achieving inspired behaviors. And the way that and the mechanisms for inspired behaviors is you've got a method of intellectual stimulation. And we've been talking about all these things, right? So what are the things that you find to be challenging and engaging, right? There's individualized consideration, right? And individualized consideration deals with, hey, everybody is different and everybody is at a different kind of continuum here as you're going through this. Then there's this idea of inspirational motivation, right? So it's about, hey, I'm doing this because I believe in it. Why? Because believe is a much stronger form of commitment and energy that you're using. And then the last one is idealized influence, which is how are you living the example that somebody else would want to follow? So that's the theory. How does the military do it? If you open up the leadership development manual for the Army, they offer this insight called guided discovery learning. And guided discovery learning breaks down into basically 3 components. I'm going to coach. That's the discovery aspect. We're going to find out the things that really motivate you. We're going to align that to what this organization does. I can teach you. There's the intellectual stimulation, right? So that's the learning part. I'm going to make you grow. And then there's the mentorship, which is the guidance, right? And so I'm going to provide you advice along the way that's going to help, that's particular to you, which is that individualized consideration for your own growth and development. I'm going to provide you specific advice for you. And that's what military leaders do. And the best example that I can give of this is that there was about 20 years ago, I had this break in service. And I was thinking about coming back into the Army, and I was not in a good place in my life. I was unemployed. The economy took a downturn. I got laid off from my job, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I reached out to 4 different people. I wasn't in their unit. One of them had a full-time job as an executive assistant at the Pentagon. The other guy was a brigade commander at the time. So these were busy
job.
people.
Yeah.
And they took the time, and I was talking to them several times a week sometimes several times a day, because of where I was trying to figure out my own life. And these individuals, and the one guy's name is a guy by the name of Bob Bear, and the other one is Shane Deverill. They set that example for me and really modeled that leadership behavior for me, because they didn't owe me anything. I wasn't even in the unit. Like, there was no obligation to talk to me. Didn't leave on the best terms, because I had this attitude in leaving the Army the first time that Army's holding me back. Everybody's going to be working for me someday. And things didn't work out for me. And I reached out to them in out of the blue, and they gave me all the attention and focus and coached and mentored me to put me on a different and change the trajectory of my life.
Wow.
And that is the potential. And ask military leaders like yourself, what's the greatest thing that you achieve? And we describe the mentor experiences as the most endearing, and having that leader reach back out to us years later when there's no obligation to do so, but because they valued their interaction with us, there is such an intrinsic reward to that. And so that's how I experienced transformational leadership. And, I would do anything for those individuals, those leaders. And so imagine if you had that experience, or if you were working in a company and your leader was like that. Imagine what you wouldn't do, given the challenges of today's world.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Jason.
Sure.
All right, quick lightning round here. I've actually never done this with two people, so this should be fun. So I'll start with you, Zebrina, and then we'll go to you, Jason. But first one for you, Zebrina. So what is one habit, routine, or ritual that for you has made the biggest positive difference? This kind of gets into that self-leadership aspect.
The biggest impact that I've had, a habit or routine, is setting my intention for the day when I first wake up in the morning. So that kind of sets the tone for the day.
What does that look like?
Well, it comes in all forms. It looks a lot different every day. Could be in the car on the way to work, if I remember, or when I'm laying in bed and my eyes open and my mind is racing. It can come in all different ways, but it helps settle my mind and allows me to focus on what's the most important thing for the day.
So is it like one thing that you're focused on? I just am unfamiliar with the idea of setting your intention.
Yeah,
for
setting
the day.
intention. So if I feel like I'm in a really maybe dark place, I'll focus on setting my intention for taking one step at a time. My day is just focusing on just taking it one step at a time.
Got it.
Or it's mostly with my mood and how I want to present myself for the day.
I love that. I think that makes such a big difference. It's kind of a mantra for the day of like, hey, this is what I'm going to focus on.
Yeah,
Or,
that's right.
I did a podcast. I think it was my first podcast episode I ever did. I did one on the idea of having a swing thought for the day. It's kind of an analogy to golf of like, hey, as a golfer, you can't think about too many things. So you just focus on one thing. Just focus on keeping your head down, or, not keeping your head up or something like that. Jason, what would it be for you? So what is the top habit, routine, or ritual that for you has made the biggest difference?
Always shifting my energy, like looking for an opportunity. Like, so when something bad happens, rather than stew on it or worry about it, think about, okay, well, where's the opportunity here? Because I found that, the anxiety of a setback or a problem, it's wasted energy. And so when I have a setback, I'm like, okay, so where's the opportunity? Like the first book I wrote, I had asked for some permissions to do something, I was denied. And I was pretty bummed out about that. But the opportunity there was that, hey, I have to rely on myself to come up with this content, and I can do this work. And so that was the opportunity, was for me to validate myself. And so, when you face that setback or things don't go as planned, see it as an opportunity so that you can continue to move forward.
How do you do that? Is that kind of just, you're just telling yourself like, hey, think about the opportunity here?
Well, so I do it through several steps. The first step is I got to acknowledge whatever the bad feeling is that I have at the time. So I have to recognize that, right? And sometimes, recognizing that means that, hey, I got to go work out, or I got to go, I need to walk away from this for right now. I need to just just chill. The second thing is I ask myself, where can I show compassion? Compassion could be to myself. Compassion could be appreciation or gratitude to somebody else. And those are techniques that increase your sense of well-being, and it kind of opens up your vector of creativity. And then I'll ask, okay, so now where's the opportunity? And to your point, sometimes it'll take a day, because I need a day, because sometimes the bad emotion needs to set for a while. But, it, for me, and what it's done for me in my life is, especially as like a small business owner and all that, is that it allows me to get into an action and problem solving mode much faster.
Yeah, that's good. And it's not ignoring the bad. It's you're kind of giving yourself a moment to put a label on it, to feel it. I love that. That's really great.
Exactly.
All right, Zebrina, what's your top marriage or relationship advice?
That would be to play.
I love that.
It's to remember to play. I don't care how old you are, how long you've been married. There is no excuse not to play. And whether it's with your kids, or I play with my husband all the time. So at times we're playing and the kids want to get in on it, and we're like, no, sorry.
I love that. That's great. Jason, what about you?
Well, my instinct wants me to say my wife is always right. That's what makes a successful marriage. But I would say it's just, it's investing the daily time for each other, and just being there and it's the little things, whether it's a brief time in the morning, it's a brief time in the evening, it's taking a walk together. There's so much you can do with your job, with the kids, with everything else you've got going on in your life, that you've just got to take time for the two of you to invest in conversations and relationships. And it doesn't have to be a date night. It doesn't have to be something big. It's just where you two are present. My wife and I value that, and then we find things that we enjoy doing together as we're willing to explore those kinds of things. So I would say that was probably the biggest thing for us.
That's great. I love that. All right, I'm going to make this our last one. So, Zebrina, you're speaking to a group of college students. They're about to graduate college. What would be like your biggest piece of advice for them?
Find your passion. Find what drives you and motivates you, and run with it. Go with it. There's oftentimes jobs out there that look great. They're shiny on the outside, but once you get inside, it's hard. And if you don't have what excites you there, then it's going to be really hard to get through those really difficult days and challenging times. So follow your heart.
I love that. What about you, Jason?
I would say it's always about the people. The things that you do, the money that you make, and all of that. And the human experience is all about the social interactions, and the people you impact, the people you love, the people who love you. And so I would remind them, as that ambition and that drive is that, hey, it's always about the people.
I love that. So what Jim Collins would say, first two. Let me let you guys. So tell us, Zebrina, I'll start with you, and then Jason, give you the last word. Anything, and any just kind of parting advice for leaders, anything about where people can find the book or follow you guys, anything you'd like to end on. Zebrina, I'll start with you, and then we'll finish up with you, Jason.
Yeah, Cal, you actually hit on something early on when you were talking with Jason about how you're playing down your leadership skills and the role that you play. Especially for veteran leaders and military leaders, I think it's important for you to own that you are amazing. Don't devalue your experiences. Don't devalue, oh, this is normal. I do this every day. Why would anyone else care about it? These are veteran leaders. You have what it takes to actually do really, really well in the civilian sector. And you just have to be able to present it in a way that connects, and you can see that they can see your value. So I feel like that's really important.
And Jason, I'll give you the final word. Also, if you don't mind telling folks a little bit about where they can find out about ZeroSix Group and the book.
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon, and for right now, we're working on the Kindle copies and those kinds of things. But you go on Amazon, you can search for The Leader's Choice, and or by our names, Jason Roncoroni, Zebrina Warner, and ZeroSix Group. We've got all the information about what we're talking about with the ADAPT process is on our website at ZeroSixGroup.com.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you both so much. I have enjoyed this. This has been a masterclass on leadership with two amazing people. And I will put links to the book and ZeroSix Group and how to connect with both Zebrina and Jason in the show notes for this episode. And Zebrina, Jason, thank you so much. Hope you go and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Cal.
Appreciate it.